We are. Okay, good, thanks. Wonderful. I hope it works. Good. Okay, here we are, and we're learning Likuti Sichot of the Rebbe, and this is a sikha, of course, about Abraham, and the angels. Abraham, after he circumcised himself, so he was recovering, and Hashem came to visit him, and also there were three angels. So let's see a little bit about this. The Gemara teaches us from the fact that Avram Avinu had gesagt, he said to God, Hashem, im no matzatichin meinecha al na tavor me'alodecha. He said, if I find favor in your eyes, please don't leave. As gadol hachnasas orchim mekabalas pnei shechina. What happened over there? It says, how does the Torah portion begin? And Vayera alav Hashem, that God appeared to Abraham, and then all of a sudden he saw three people standing there. He said, what happened? Why did God come to visit him, first of all? He said, because it was the third day of the circumcision, and Abraham had been waiting 3 days in the entrance of his tent for somebody to pass by. He had this tent, an ashel, that he made in the middle of the desert in Beersheba, and that he would invite people to come in and give them free food, and then encourage them to thank God for the food. And then he said, thank God for the food, I'll give everything to you for free. So God himself, the Shekhinah, God's presence, appeared to Abraham. And before God could say anything to him, he saw three men standing. He said, who are the three men? There were really three angels that God brought to him because he had mercy on him. He had mercy on him, on Abraham, that he was more pained by the fact that he didn't have guests than he was by the circumcision that he had just made on himself. A 99-year-old man made circumcision on himself, which was tremendous physical pain, but he had more pain from the fact that he didn't have guests. So God gave him three guests. So Abraham ran to the guests and he said, please don't leave. From this we learn that it's greater to accept guests than seeing the face of God. Abraham God appeared to him. He knew it was God. He knew it was God's presence, God's Shekhinah, whatever, something like it was on Mount Sinai when God appeared to all the Jews. So he was let's say a lower level. But nevertheless, Abraham knew it was God. But when he saw the guests there, he said, he ran away, and he accepted the guest. He said, guests. From this, we know that it's greater to accept guests than it is even to talk to God. Therefore, was Avram Avinu gebeten, that he asked by God to warten, to wait. Un line is gelaufen, he ran to the guests. He said, please, God, wait for me a couple seconds. Don't leave. I got some guests. Is a raya, this is a proof, as that accepting guests is greater than accepting the face of God. Okay, this at first glance makes absolutely no sense. How can it possibly be? We'll see. Azoy Paskin is the Rambam, also Maimonides. He also decided on Maimonides. Yeah, his name. I mean, this is the name that's been given to him by I don't know who. It's a bit misleading because it seems that it's some sort of secular writing. Maimonides, Nachmanides. His name was Moshe ben Maimon, so they called him Maimonides, and then he's usually referred to as the Rambam, Rav Moshe ben Maimon. That was his name. In any case, I guess this is to differentiate him from Rav Nachman ben Maimon, the Nachmanides, that he the Ramban, called the Ramban. So this sort of difficult. That's why they call him, I guess, by their last name, by the name of their father. and not by the first name. Nachmanides is the son of Nachman, and one was the son of Maimon. In any case, the Rambam, he wrote this huge, massive, amazing work, which is 14 books, all the laws of the Torah. And there are some of the great rabbis that have different opinions from him, but he's the only rabbi in the history of Judaism that wrote one book that contains all of the laws of the Torah, including the Holy Temple and etc., and the laws of Moshiach. The Rambam says, the Rambam decides. The Rambam's book is a law book telling us what to do. Und das is their lashon. This is the language from the Rambam. This is the statute that Avram Avinu said that we have to do kindness. We have to feed those wayfarers, the people who travel on the way. We have to give them to eat, to drink, and we have to accompany them. So they know that they're not traveling alone. Greater is dealing with guests than accepting the face of God. Like it says, that Abraham saw these three people and he told God to wait. And he ran to them. He just translates it in Yiddish. Und the Rambam, seine nicht verstandig, and in this Rambam is not understood two things. First of all, the way from Rambam in his Yad HaChazakah, these 12 books of law, very, very exact law, but usually what he writes is only relevant to the law. Is to bring a nog, the halakha, to tell the law, to tell us what we should do in Judaism, what you should do in Judaism. And also when it comes to loving God, what you should think to bring you to love and to bring you to awe of God, but only what's relevant to fulfilling the laws of the Torah. And the halakha line, unit dem makor, not the source from where it comes. Seiden in fall, whether in a case when der gebrachter makor, the source is an zu an Ehrenkläring, so except when when he brings the explanation, it's in order to elucidate something in the law, that we can do the law a little bit better. So then he'll explain. Aber in halacha, but in the laws from Gedol Achdas Zorchim, greater is accepting guests than the face of God. Is Zetman Nid, we can't understand why should he bring the sentence that it says Vayera, that God appeared to Abraham, Vayar, that Abraham looked and he saw three men. Right? That why does the Rambam have to bring the story? Just say as it was with Abraham. As it was with Abraham. Most people who read the Rambam know what the sentence is. Why does he have to bring the sentence where it says that Abraham was sitting with God and that he saw three men and he told God to wait? What does this add to the law? Is to libvas bring the Rambam, the pasuk. Right? What is the law? What is the law saying? You might think that accepting guests is a really nice thing. It says that no, you have no idea how important it is. You have no idea how important accepting guests is. So a person's going to say, okay, so I don't know how important it is. Okay, so I'll treat it with a little more care. Okay, so no. It's not just like that. It's greater than accepting the revelation of God. Revelation of God, that sometimes I speak in front of high schools, and always somebody asks the question, how can you prove that God exists? How can you prove that God exists? But everyone, prove that God exists, or we won't do the commandments. Prove that God exists, right? So here's a proof that God exists. Abraham appears to you. That's a proof of God. If Abraham appears to everybody, that's the best thing. You understand, God is not just a creation. God is creating everything. You feel the power. God is more powerful, now greater than an angel. He's creating all the angels. He's creating me and you. He's creating. You feel the goodness of God, the power of God. Ooh, that's really amazing, right? So, well, as amazing as that is, it's not as amazing as taking in guests. Which taking in guests is just a very mundane thing, and sometimes it can be very disappointing. You get a bad guest. Ooh, there can't be anything worse than getting a bad guest. It says, there's a good thing. That's a good thing about taking in guests. They say it's a joke. If you have a good guest, then you're happy when he comes. If you have a bad guest, then you're happy when he leaves. I got bad guest. That's terrible, right? And accepting the revelation of God, that's what could be better than that? It says no. You should understand that's how far away we are from the truth. Accepting guests is better than God's presence. Okay, good. So we know the law. It says like Abraham did, and he says that the Rambam, he brings this sentence that Abraham saw 3 people. What does that add to the novelty of this law? We know that that's what Abraham did. What does he have? Base. The Rambam himself, he explains in his explanation on the Mishnayot that all the commandments which we do now, we do it not because it was commanded. All the mitzvahs which we do now, we do Mekayim, we do them because not only because God commanded us by means of Moshe on Har Sinai. For instance, that which we nowadays circumcise our children, right? Well, a Jewish child when he's 8 days old, or a convert when he converts. So we circumcise him because Abraham did. In fact, we even say it in the blessing. Asher Kirishana V'Tzivanu, Lachtiso B'Briso Shel Avram Avinu, to bring him into the covenant of Abraham. So, but nevertheless, we don't do the commandment because Abraham did it. We only do it because God commanded it in Mount Sinai. It's another sentence in Parshas Tazria. So it says on the 8th day, you should circumcise the child. That's why we do the circumcision. It says Nidval, it's not because Abraham and his children, they circumcised themselves, nor Val, or Abraham circumcised them, nor Val the Eibishter, because God had unzakt, he commanded us through Moshe Rabbeinu, and we have to circumcise our children just like Abraham did. So true, Abraham began to do it, but that doesn't obligate us. What obligates us to circumcise our children is that God told us at Mount Sinai that we have to circumcise all children like Abraham did. By all other mitzvahs and also by all the other commandments which God commanded us before the giving of the Torah. Is loidem is nitverstanig. So now it's really not understood. Was the Rambam? What the Rambam says? Why does the Rambam that the whole thing of the Rambam is just laws? What we should actually do. So what we should actually do is what God told us on Mount Sinai, not because of what Abraham did. Why does the Rambam bring down that we should do this circumcision? Because this is the law that Abraham began. As them chok, that the chok of taking in, we're talking about not circumcision, we're talking about the taking in guests. Avram Avinu hier eingestellt. Es mir tun doch das nor weil azoi hat uns the Eibishter gesagt. The reason we do it is not like the Rambam says because Abraham did it. We do it because God said that we should do it on Mount Sinai. And we the Rambam, a line like the Rambam himself writes, as the mitzvahs from Achnas Zorchan, the commandment of bringing in guests, Gaitarain and the Klal ve'havta l'recha kamocha. There isn't a separate commandment to take in guests. There's one big commandment, and that is love your fellow man as yourself. Is vos, if so, is vos learned ons thus was Avram Avinu. So why does the Rambam teach us? What do we learn by the fact that Abraham did it? Right? You should just say, bring a law, as God says, you must love your neighbor as yourself, which includes taking in guests and helping a bride and a groom, and helping your friends not to argue one with the other. There's a whole a series of things which are implied by this law of loving your neighbor as yourself. And one of them is taking a guess. And that's the law. What does the Rambam have to bring in this thing about that it's greater than accepting the Moshiach, and then he has to then accepting the face of God, and then he also has to bring in the sentence from Abraham to prove it. Abraham has nothing to do with it. It's just a law you have to take. Okay, but obviously the Rebbe is not asking questions to try to say that the Rambam is wrong. He's trying to say that the Rambam is certainly right, and that he's trying to teach us something very, very important that we wouldn't understand without the Rambam teaching. We'll see. In the actual doing of the commandment of taking a guess. In the Tikkuni Zohar, there's a book which is called Tikkuni Zohar. It's got 70 different explanations, Kabbalistic explanations of the word Breshit. 70, that's called Tikkuni Zohar. 70 different explanations of the first word of the Torah. As Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, had gesagt, that said, Zakayihu man makabel orchim b'ra'an shalem. B'reu shalem, this is Aramaic. Meritorious, or happy, meritorious, is that one who accepts guests with a full heart. Ke'ilu makabel panei Shechina, as though he accepts the face of the Shechina. In other words, what's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, accepting guests is just like accepting the face of God. L'chora is this mimer, at first glance, what Rabbi Shimon says in this book Tikkuni Zohar, this contradicts what we said before in the Gemara and also the Rambam. It says that over there, it says that accepting guests is greater than accepting the face of God. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the Zohar says it's equal. Even though we find very often different opinions between the rabbis, in the Gemara itself, and the Gemara and Zohar, and also between the Gemara and the Zohar, right? Judaism encourages arguments. The reason it encourages arguments is to tell us that God creates everybody differently, and everyone is entitled to their opinion. But once a person expresses his argument, then you have to see what is his opinion based on. It could be a person's opinion is based on false premises. That's the whole idea of the golden calf. Right? If everybody would have argued, should we do the golden calf or shouldn't we do the golden calf? So those people that said that we should, they'd see that their basis is false. They just heard from God not to do it. But different opinions are valued in Judaism very much. In fact, the whole Talmud is just different opinions. And it says that every opinion is the word of God, contradicting opinions. How can this possibly be? Because this is godly understanding. This is not normal understanding. Normal understanding, you tell the law and that's it. Here they have all these different opinions. And afterwards, after all, then the law is decided. And sometimes, like the Sephardic Jews, they take a different aspect of the law. Sometimes the Rambam, the Maimonides, he takes a different view of the law, but it's all based very firmly, and it tells what the bases are. So here we have a case that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he says that accepting guests is equal to accepting the face of God. And in the Talmud, it says that accepting guests is greater than the face of God. And the Rambam agrees with the Talmud. But in their opinion, in this, we can't say this is just a regular argument. It's not relevant to say that the Zohar disagrees with the Talmud. Why? Because the Talmud learns from a sentence. It brings its source. On Abba Poel, as Maisarav, it brings that Abraham actually left God's presence and he went to get the guests. It says that getting guests is greater. As Musman learn, so therefore we have to learn that the Zohar in such a way that there is no contradiction between what the actual happened with Abraham and the conclusion that the Gemara comes to what Rabbi Shimon says. I mean, what is Rabbi Shimon's source? What's his source for saying that it's equal? The Gemara is a wonderful source. What Abraham did. What's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the Zohar? What's his source? The Pshad in Tikkun Zohar vet veren verstandig. The explanation in the Zohar is understood with then what Vesfrir, like we said before, that the level from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Okay, who is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, there was no one in the whole Talmud, in certain way we can say perhaps in the history of Judaism, that was like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he was the greatest of all of the what's called the Tanaim, the early rabbis. He wrote this book, the Zohar. Was Erad Gezakt, them Eibishter's Maimer from Tikkun Zohar. He was one who gave her the Eber de Mountain. He was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. He's one that said this quote from the Tikkun Zohar that accepting guests is equal to God. Now, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he passed away on Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of counting the Omer. It was 33 days, basically 33 days from Passover. He passed away. And that day is a very, very special day. About 500,000 people go up to his grave. He lived in the city of Meron. And about 500,000, there's nobody else in Judaism that's anywhere close to that. That on the day of his passing, there go so many. There's amazing stories about Rabbi Shimon in heaven that nobody can possibly get close to his place, and that in his lifetime there was no rainbow in the sky, because the rainbow is when God might want to destroy the world because of the sins. And in his generation, there were no sins, right? He guarded on his whole generation. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, there was never anybody like him in Judaism. So it says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that his learning Torah, that's what he did all day and all night. Un oich is given from the Bnei Aliyah. He was one of the very high people, was a field which even in Nigla, the Torah, is cleared the groister from the Tzvei Milos. Mikol Shechen vi zer mavur in Penimis Torah. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he was the highest of the high of all of the rabbis that there were, and especially in the inside of it. That's talking about the revealed aspect of the Torah, and the Talmud and the opinions of the Talmud. How much more so in the secrets of the Torah? He was the one that wrote the book, the Zohar. In Chassidus, Zayndik, in Azoy Madrega, he lived like about 1,800 years ago, something like that, 1,800 years ago. And it was, for a while, the Zohar was sort of hidden, and then it became revealed, but it was the one that, there's a lot of secular people that say somebody else wrote the Zohar. That's not so. They don't know what they're talking about. Verstandig, Vi Hoich by Rabbi Shimon is given the Inyan from Kabbalah's Panei Shechina. So if so, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was so tremendously high, so he really appreciated God's presence. Ubefrad for the Zohar, like the Zohar says, Man Panei Adam, who is the face of God? The Rabbi Shimon, he's the face of God. It says 3 times a year you have to go up to see the face of God. In the Zohar, one of the other rabbis say, who is the face of God? It's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The mele is doch, das was lagabi unser erich. So therefore, by what we call accepting the face of Shechina, as makabel zayin de medrega from penimius elokus, receiving the inner aspect of God, had Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai halten by the medrega ständig. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he was always with the face of God. By him had allemal geleuchten. By him, it was already always shining. Their penei, the penei is the inside of God. And Muzman Dach Gzogan, so we have to say that by Rabbi Shimon, his accepting of guests was at a tremendously different level than ours. Okay, what does this mean, accepting the face of God? This is explained in very, very great depth and length in Chassidut. The two aspects, opposite aspects of God. First of all, God is infinitely close to us. He's creating everything from nothing, and he's creating everything personally. He does it by means of a whole process of concealing himself and veils and contractions and hidings and things like that. But nevertheless, God is doing the whole thing. There's nothing except for God. On the other hand, God is infinitely distant from us. We don't have any idea really what spiritual is, a little tiny bit. And God creates the spiritual. Right? All the religions in the world are based on spiritual. And the God of Israel creates the spiritual. So he's infinitely far away from us. So God's infinitely far and he's infinitely close. We don't really feel either one of these things. All we feel is just ourselves. The only place, the way that you can really feel the God of the Jews that's infinitely far and infinitely close is through the Torah, learning the Torah. When God revealed himself on Mount Sinai, as that was the revelation of these two, what seemed to be to us total opposites. We just finished learning the Mimer, the upper awareness of God and the lower awareness of God. That's why in the Holy of Holies was the tablets, the two tablets, the Torah. Rabbi Shimon was so devoted to the Torah, and he had such a deep comprehension of the Torah that he actually felt the giver of the Torah all the time. In other words, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai really, truly felt and appreciated the fact that God is totally above any possibility of comprehension. And on the other hand, he's totally, because he's so far away, and also totally above and beyond any sort of comprehension because he's infinitely close. Right? We don't even understand what our own life is. The people that are atheists, they don't understand, they don't believe in God. Okay, but what is life? They don't know. They don't understand. No one can understand what life is. And life is just a gift of God. Life is close to us. It's so close, we can't understand it. When in Fargleich, so Rebbe Shimon, he had a tremendously high appreciation and awareness of God in a totally different way than anybody else. When in Fargleich, it says that Rebbe Shimon, he was like the main precursor, the preparation for Moshiach is through the Zohar, through the book the Zohar. That's the main preparation for Shekhinah, for the Moshiach. Because Moshiach, he'll bring about this revelation that everyone will feel God, that the whole world will feel filled with God. Like we see in the Aleinu prayer 3 times a day. When in Fargleich, mit der Heicher Madriga from Kabbalah's Panei Shekhinah by Rabbi Shimon, und Leut sein unsere Darga, hat euch azoi genommen Welt. And just like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he appreciated God more than anyone else. So he also, he appreciated the world. By Rabbi Shimon to do a commandment was such an amazing thing. He felt it was a commandment, and taking a guest, it was is nit gresser nor is gleich zu sein Kabbalah's Panei Shekhinah. He realized how high the accepting of guests was, and that was exactly according to his appreciation of God. In other words, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, let's say if our appreciation of a regular tzaddik, his appreciation is, let's say, level 1, is by Rabbi Shimon, it was level 10. So by everybody else, what does Abraham say? That accepting guests is greater than the Shekhinah, greater than the Shekhinah. And namely, it was greater than the appreciation of the Shekhinah of everybody else. Of course, accepting guests is a commandment of God, right? He says it's greater than the Shekhinah, the level of Shekhinah that we can appreciate. But it's not greater than the level of the Shekhinah that Rabbi Shimon can appreciate. The people that can't appreciate such a level of awareness of God, like Rabbi Shimon, is by them taking in guest is greater than the face of the Shekhinah. So Rabbi Shimon revealed how high and wonderful God is, right? as by him accepting guests, which by everybody else is higher than the awareness of God. As by Rabbi Shimon, it was equal. Rabbi Shimon, the appreciation of God by us is such a low thing, and doing a commandment is a very high thing, which is the essence of God. So he's saying the appreciation that we have of God, is lower than what we accomplished by taking in guests. But by Rabbi Shimon taking in guests, that was equal to his appreciation of God, because his appreciation of God was so high. And as we don't know how high taking in guests is, and Rabbi Shimon didn't know how high. It was equal to his awareness of God's presence. Another thing, as Redzich in Likuti Torah, it says in the book Likuti Torah in Chabad, as Mitzad de Maila from the Shamas Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was so high, Hat Mitzain, that he, with his spiritual service, he could have drawn down everything which is drawn down by others and doing commandments. The Rebbe Shimon personally, he himself personally, with his personal love and fear of God, could do what others can do with the commandments. What's the proof? That all the time that he was in the Mara, Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai was very outspoken, and he spoke out against the Romans. The Jews were trying to flatter the Romans. He was living in the time after the destruction of the temple. They were trying to flatter the Romans and say, they're really nice people and they're not so bad, and let's get in good with the government. We have to do what's practical. And Rabbi Shimon said, no way. The Romans are evil people. We can't copy them or praise them in any way. And the Romans heard about it, and he had to run away. They wanted to kill him, and he had to run away with his son and hide in a cave. So he hid in a cave for 13 years. So when he was hiding in the cave, he couldn't go out at all. If anybody would have seen him, they would have killed him. He didn't have when he was in this cave, he didn't have the chance to eat matzah. He couldn't make kiddush on wine. He didn't have an etrog. He didn't have a sukkah, etc. But nevertheless, he did all of the commandments in a spiritual way, which other Jews had to do in a physical way. He could do them in a spiritual way. And it accomplished the same thing. The Torah the Torah exempted him from doing all these commandments, but we can't say that from above that he was missing all the blessings that the commandments bring. So Rabbi Shimon with his spiritual service, his love and his fear of God, so he accomplished what other people can only do by actually doing the commandments. Therefore, by him, it's relevant, Nogea given, by under the Gashmius from the mitzvahs. Therefore, by him, for certain to do the commandments was certainly important to him, like everybody else. Unvir Zach, like it says in the Yerushalmi, V'lo modi Rebbe Shimon she mafsikim lasos sukkah v'lasos lulav avol nita zoifil nogea vida under. So of course Rebbe Shimon had to do the commandments. There's nothing like the commandments, but it wasn't so necessary by him to do the commandments like other people, because he just by his spiritual service could achieve this level. Don't think, oh well, I can also. It's not so. There was nobody like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Oich dan ben erhat mitzvah the mitzvahs makayim gemen b'pol mamash in gashmias arangin numan oich the mitzvahs achnasas orchim. So when Rabbi Shimon, when he got out of the cave, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai didn't say, oh, I can do them all spiritually. I'll just keep doing the commandments spiritually. No, he did the commandments physically, but only exactly what was necessary, because by him, his spiritual service, especially his learning of the Torah, was so tremendously high that he was a person that he was constantly aware of the Creator. Al derech vider halacha, like the law of Allah, she'en lo ma'aseh ein lokin alav. Allah, a negative commandment, which you actually didn't actually do anything. So there's no physical punishment. As gefindt men kama poskim, we find a lot of people, as a lot of opinions, as wenn their love is in allgemein from their sug she'en bo meise, is a filu in them fall when she is over of them love durach a meise. If it's you, I'll give you an example. If it's a negative commandment and there's no deed in the commandment, right? To tell a lie, right? To lie. So it says you don't get beaten for telling a lie because you didn't do anything. You just said. But what happens if you actually do something? Some people say that even in that case, right? If it's a commandment, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything in order to transgress. But you did do something. Nevertheless, it's as though you didn't do anything. Kommt nit for them kain malchus. Person doesn't get punished by the lashes. Weil the meise werkt nit in azoy lav. Vu beikar is there a lav she'en bo meise. Right? A negative command. You're not supposed to think thoughts against Hashem. You're not supposed to think. You're not supposed to think those sasur achri Lubavitcher. You're not supposed to think thoughts against Hashem. What if a person does think thoughts against Hashem? So what if he even he tells everybody, I'm thinking thoughts against Hashem. So there's no punishment because he didn't do anything. But what if he actually does do something? So there's some opinions that say that even if he does, right, do something, he writes it on a piece of paper, I don't believe in God, right? So because there's no punishment, it's a negative commandment. He did it, but there's no punishment because you don't have to do a command, a deed in order to transgress this. So even if he does do a deed, there's no punishment. What's this talking about? Because the commandment of taking in guests, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he actually did do, but he did it in such a tremendous high level that doing of the mitzvah was so important to him because beikar hat zi mekayim gewen durch avoda ruchnis. He did mainly. He was doing everything spiritually. Is in ruchnis the mitzvahs achnasas orchim is nit gresser from kabbalas pnei shechina. That's what he wanted to say. His appreciation of God was so great that his doing of the commandment was equal to that appreciation of God. This also the same thing is because he was able to do all the commandments in a spiritual way, and he didn't need so much to actually do the physical, even though he did it. So by him, the actual deed wasn't that important. How much more so, he did the deed, but it wasn't that important because his main thing was his intention. As is nit gresser from azoy hoicha kabbalas pnei shechina, visa is given by Rashbi, that no one else could do the commandment of bringing in guests in such a way that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai did. So first of all, his appreciation of God was so great that he really appreciated what it means to bring in guests. So therefore, when he took in, his taking in guests was equal to his tremendously high appreciation of God. So it was equal. By us, we don't appreciate God. So our doing of guests is even higher than appreciating God. Also, another thing, when Rabbi Shimon did take in guests, then it was reached even a higher level than what we can. So that was really equal to any appreciation of what God is. Therefore, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Gazakti said, taking in guests is equal to accepting the face of the Shekhinah. But the Torah is doch ala rov deber. You can ask a question, 1 second. So why did he leave? Abraham, he must have had the same appreciation of God as Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai did. Why did he say that accepting guests is greater? He says, because the Torah is talking about the majority of people. The Torah is is in an open in such a way, versus ein gemusten, to their merit, the Torah is measured out according to the majority of Jews. Was kumen nitzu, the most Jews don't get to the level of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. High people, it says they're very, very few. Therefore, the Torah says that taking in guests is greater than accepting the face of God. Und das kommt der Rambam, that's why the Rambam comes and he says, by the sentence, He says greater is the accepting of guests than the accepting of the face of God. The Rambam says, and he brings a sentence from Abraham to prove it. Oh, this is a bit longer than I thought. And he says it in the law, that this is what, from the source of this law, as you could think that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he's arguing with the law, with the that even though that there's an argument in the Talmud Bavli, there, with the Zohar, we always find that the law is always like the Talmud Bavli, but nevertheless, these are the words of the living God. And that every opinion in the Torah is holy, like I said before. And so therefore, the Deya from Zohar by Yidden, as that we should know that there is an opinion like this in the Zohar. There is an opinion like this in the Zohar, that accepting guests is equal. Therefore, the Rambam, he brings the sentence. And why? To tell us that there really is no argument whatsoever with the Rambam and the Gemara. There's no argument. There is no wonder to tell us that even that Avraham Avinu, that even though he had an appreciation of God like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, so he's telling us, nevertheless, he ran away from the awareness of God that he had, and he went to accept guests, to tell us that it's accepting guests is greater. Doing a physical commandment is always going to be greater than the highest of spiritual revelations. Let's just go to the next thing. And this aspect of Abraham, he inherited to each and every one of us. Let's see, maybe we can do this. Here we go. This is also what the Rambam says. This is the way of the kindness that Abraham did. That this way of Abraham was the way of kindness that he had the Abraham, he was the one that established his taking in guests in such a way which is relevant to all the Jews, even to such a Jew which is much, much lower than the lowest level of possible Jew you could have, that he has no appreciation of God whatsoever. He says, don't worry, you're going to be like Abraham. Abraham left God's presence to do a commandment. You just do the commandment. You know, you're going to be higher than any idea of God what you have. When the Rebbe, therefore, he gave us, Abraham is our father, that the commandment, doing a commandment of taking in guests, this is greater than any awareness of God that we could possibly have. This, by the way, is the big, proof that there are some Jews that they were very spiritual people, very emotional spiritual people, and they said the main thing is just to be spiritual, to love God, to pray to God, to have a spiritual feeling. The main thing is just that you're a nice person, you get along with everybody. You don't have to do the commandments. The commandments. Well, I mean, they have a point. You know, they certainly have a point. The commandments don't seem to really be very much of helpful to mankind or anything. So he says, well, you should know how wrong you are. In fact, the commandments are even higher than the face of God. Unless you happen to be a person like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, then the commandments are equal to the face of God, you realize. And nevertheless, you have to do the commandments. Even if you're the level of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, you still have to do the commandments. And this is, but nevertheless, Abraham, he set it for us a possibility that every single Jew, even a Jew that has absolutely no idea what God is, but by doing a commandment, and in this case, it was taking in guests. So therefore, and the reason is because God takes us as guests, and we're not such good guests after all, when it comes down to it. The mitzvah of accepting in guests in a way which is greater than even accepting the face of God. Nor, but Abraham, by means of his service, as he inherited to us as he carved it into us, into our hearts, in the heart of every Jew, his way of kindness, which is the beginning, doing kindness, which the beginning is the foundation of all of the emotions and all the way you should act. And from this comes into action, which that's the whole essence of man. That's what it says in Proverbs. The whole essence of man is what you actually do, and actually doing the commandments. So Abraham showed us how important it is that even though that Abraham's commandment that he did was way before the Torah was given, but nevertheless he showed, and so his commandment was not as high as the commandments we do now. The commandments we do now, we have not only the power of Abraham, we also have the power of the Torah, of God himself, that he gave it to every single Jew for all generations, the Torah. But nevertheless, even Abraham, even the level of commandments that he did was higher than the perception of God that he had. He's coming to try to tell us how amazingly high the commandments are. And that's why even Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, when it came to doing the commandments, as he did them, no matter how high he was, and he didn't have to do them when he was in the cave, as he accomplished the same blessings just by his love and his fear and his learning Torah. So the commandments are tremendously, infinitely more important than we can possibly imagine, and that's what's going to save the whole world. Let's just do the Yom Yom. From the previous Rebbe writes that from his father's speeches in the Hasidic Exodus from Egypt, there's the commandment of recounting Exodus, to tell Hasidic stories and to feel and appreciate the story in its deepest inwardness. One should know that every story, Hasidic story, is a guide for living. Every story should bring forth a good character trait, an inner enthusiasm for doing the commandments, and should enable us to sense the pleasantness of Hasidic teachings and of the Torah in general. Let's do tomorrow's. Let's see if we can, I'm pressing the right button over here. I don't know why it says Menachem Av. What's this got to do? Something is wrong over here. 1 second, 1 second. 1 minute. Why is the month of what's going on over here? All right, I don't know if this is right or not. Here it says the month of Av, and we are not in the month of Av. Okay, let's suffice with what we did, and we'll try to understand what exactly is what exactly happened over here. God bless you all. Have a good Shabbat with Moshiach now. God willing, we'll continue our learning on Sunday, 8:15 in the morning. Have a good day and a good Shabbat. And I hope that on Yom Rishon, on Sunday, we'll all be dancing with Moshiach, Mamash, in Yerushalayim, in the Holy Temple. God bless you all. Have a good, successful, blessed, meaningful Shabbat.